For Freeology Friday. I'm Derrick Day, and he is.
And I'm Aaron Tomlinson.
And what's
I,
in the glass tonight, Aaron?
I'm just drinking a Merlot again.
Yeah, well, straight Scotch,
Mm.
uh, Glenlivet, Caribbean Reserve.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah,
I need to keep some scotch on hand.
yeah. So it's like it was finished in barrels that held Caribbean rum.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's got a nice sweet taste to it, real drinkable. I'm gonna enjoy this.
Yeah, good. How's the weather been over there?
Man, this week it has been hot. It's just been sunny and hot. I think we had some rain earlier in the week, and yesterday the barometric pressure dropped like, we were going to get some rain, but it didn't happen. How about you? How's the weather in sunny Colorado?
It was hot this week, finally. I mean, not, that we look forward to that necessarily, but we finally got up into the triple digits.
Oh
Which,
shit.
to be almost to July and get that hot, that's pretty rare for us. It's still humid, too. It's humid here because we're getting so much rain, and that's not
Yeah.
usual for us at all.
Well, yeah, it's been kind of humid here too, but we haven't hit triple digits yet, which I'm surprised,
Yeah.
but yeah, I gotta say something real quick. I want to give a shout out to some family members of mine. My cousins, Kathy, Susan, Darren, and Kevin, that they lost their mom.
Mm.
My aunt Louise passed away day before yesterday, and and she was just one of the best people in the world. That's all I can say about her. And you know, her husband, his name was Willie James Lilly. He passed away in December. We called him Bear. We called him Uncle Bear, right?
Hmm.
And he passed away in December, and then she passed away pretty much 6 months afterward.
Yeah.
But I just want to give a shout out to my cousins and then to my mom because this was her last sibling.
Mm.
So I can't imagine the loneliness she feels right now. You know, I mean, it's one thing to have kids, but it's another thing, that all of your siblings, everybody you grew up with is anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I have to say this to everybody is that I had a moment. I had a really good meltdown on Wednesday, and I really needed it because we're talking about from pain to pleasure.
Hmm.
And here's the thing, I believe that you can understand pleasure without pain. I'm not one of those people, they say, well, you got to have pain to understand pleasure. I don't
Right.
necessarily agree with that.
Right.
But what I will say is that when you go through a storm and it comes out sunny on the other side, you feel better.
Hmm.
You feel better. So
True.
I feel, I can actually say that emotionally, I feel better than I have in months.
Oh, that's good.
So
Yeah.
I hate that something like this had to happen to get me there, but here I am.
Yeah. All right.
So, with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce the topic for the night.
Yeah. Yeah. So my thinking on this is, uh, there's a saying out there: if it feels good, do it. If it
Mm,
doesn't feel good, don't do it. Right. And we used to bash on that as Christians a lot. Um, like that was just hedonistic. That's just hedonism. That's just
yeah.
going to lead to all kinds of problems because within the context of Christianity and Christian love and the cross and denying yourself and all that stuff, we glorified pain in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
We glorified pain. The cross, the crucifix in Catholic churches. This is the highest expression of God's love. It glorifies pain.
You suffer with Christ.
Hmm. And I remember going to marriage conferences, and I've been taking a lot of training uh, the last couple of weeks because I got to get caught up before I can renew my license, which I have to do in August. And so one of the areas that I'm not as strong as a counselor is in relationship counseling.
Mm,
And so I've been going ahead and taking a lot of my continuing education credits on relationship counseling. And I remember, I can't tell you how many marriage conferences that we may have attended where we heard, God's not into your happiness. God just wants you to glorify him,
Yeah.
something like that. Like your happiness is at the bottom rung, especially when it comes to marriage.
God doesn't want you happy. He wants you holy.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, suffer through a horrible marriage just cause, and somehow that's glorifying God. And I remember going to a couple anniversaries, significant anniversaries. I'll just leave it at that. You have the 10, the 25, the 50,
Mhm.
60, whatever. And having some working knowledge of this couple, and they went to their anniversary party. And it was just a real revelation to me at the time because everybody was clapping for them and praising them and cheering them. They'd made it to 50 years.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is silly because we're celebrating a couple who for 50 years have made themselves miserable.
Yeah.
And then we're patting them on the back. So anyway, one of my areas of specialty has been trauma or pain. You could just describe trauma as emotional pain, right?
Yep.
And when you work with people who have suffered trauma, complex trauma, and as a person who suffered a lot of trauma myself, you build the behavioral patterns to cope with trauma. Let's say you do that in childhood. Let's say you grow up in a traumatic childhood home with an abusive parent or alcoholic, substance user, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And you learn to manage and govern your thinking and your behaviors based on survival in that context. And then those things become habits and patterns later on in life. Or you can go through horrible trauma as an adult too, or you can get into an abusive narcissistic relationship. And if someone's in a relationship with a narcissist, they eventually become the planet around which the narcissist is the sun, and they are the planet around which they have to track the orbit, always keeping that person happy and at the center of their attention. So there are just lots of different ways that we can develop patterns of behavior, patterns of thinking, ways of thinking and feeling, where we're living our lives basically leading by our pain or trying to avoid our pain. And so much of our life is structured around, I don't want to feel that pain. I don't want to experience that again. I want to feel safe. And so we're sort of walking through life leading by our trauma or leading by our pain.
Yeah.
But then there's another way. I think the pathway to healing is to move, like, let's put it on a continuum, right? So you got pain on one side and pleasure on the other, and it's on a continuum. And so at some point you cross the threshold from leading and structuring your life around your trauma and your pain, and you begin to go for what feels good or pleasure. You begin to go for what you want. If it feels good, do it in that sense. So I'm not talking about hedonism necessarily, where you just are in a constant chase for the next high. I'm not talking about that.
Yep.
But I am saying, if our heart is not deceitful and wicked above all things, I think we can use this pain and pleasure principle in our lives to govern our lives. And if it feels good, do it, or do things and do more things that make you feel good. And eventually you can begin to structure your life around this pleasure principle of satisfaction and wholeness, and leading by that rather than leading by your pain. So that's how I'll set it up.
Yep. And here's the interesting thing that I've learned, right? If it feels good, do it. Is a real, I don't know, it's a study in contrast, right? Because on the one hand, you do something, you say, I feel good, so therefore I'm going to do it. But then you don't look downrange and see the consequence of what it is that you do, right? And then what felt good momentarily feels bad for a long time, right? And so what I've learned, and this has been my experience, and your mileage may vary, that I've learned to weigh what feels good in terms of what its uh, consequences are.
Right.
So I have this theory or this mind map or paradigm that I live by, that I try to think things out to the most illogical possible conclusion. In other words, if this thing goes sideways in the stupidest way possible, what
Right.
does that look like,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I do that, then I say, okay, if at its most ridiculous end that this winds up being hurtful, harmful, that it's damaging to reputation, damaging to property, that sort of thing, I stop and I don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, and I want to kind of unpack this too, because we're talking about pleasure and pain, because we're talking about move on the continuum from pleasure or from pain to pleasure, right? And that's the way most people look at it. They're like, okay, how do I get from a painful situation to a happy situation, to a pleasing situation? But there's also this is like a bidirectional circuit, right?
Mm-hmm.
That some people find pleasure in pain.
Right.
So they seek the pain. And here's the thing, immediately when you say that, most people are going to go to sadomasochism, right? They're going to say, "Ah, yeah, see," but I think it's actually more nuanced,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you and I both know people who are drama seekers, you know, and in other words, their trauma feeds their drama,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I know
So
exactly what you mean.
so the pain, and look, can I share a story? Because this
Yeah.
was something my brother told me years ago, and I preached this, man. I used to preach this thing all the fucking time. Basically, this guy comes into a doctor's office and he's got on an overcoat, right? And the overcoat makes him look bigger than he is. And so he says, "Doctor, I need you to help me with this pain." And so the doc says, "Well, let's take off this coat and see what the source of the pain is." So he takes off the coat, and the guy's got an arrow going completely through him, right? He's got an arrow going completely through him. And so the doctor says, "Great. We know exactly what the problem is. You've got an arrow going right through your torso. So I'm going to schedule you for surgery right now so that you can get this arrow out and you can get to a pain free life." And the guy says, "Well, doc, hold on for just a second. Because, see, because of this arrow, people give me attention. People talk to me who ordinarily wouldn't talk to me. People pay attention to me that normally wouldn't. And doc, they give me sympathy and compassion, and they give me stuff, and they even give me money. So doc, I don't want the arrow removed. I just want something for the pain." so so the thing is that there are some people that they actually dwell in the pain, right? and,
Right.
and so you and I, we've talked about this, about sitting with your emotions, right? Because that's mindfulness, and understanding where you are at a particular point in time is essential to having clear thoughts, basically balancing light and shadow and all of that. But there are some people that I think that they create, or they invite pain because it gives them leverage
Mm-hmm.
with people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take on this. It's
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, that is someone who has orchestrated their life around pain. So pain becomes a source of getting their needs met. So people pay attention to me when I'm pain. They make me the center of attention. They do what I want. I can use pain as a trump card to get my way.
Ooh, you said the magic word.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. I know. I can use it, as a power play to get my way. And but again, that's not healthy. So somewhere along the way, they learned that they could not get their needs met in a more appropriate fashion or in a way that might work better for them if
Yep.
they would learn how to do that. And so one of the things that I've noticed is when we talk about pain and pleasure, we talk about either one of those on both ends of the spectrum. If you did this in polite company, in other words, those are almost as taboo a topics as politics and religion.
Yep.
Like if someone, nobody wants to just meet someone and have them trauma dump on you, right?
Yep.
So we learn maybe where it's appropriate to trauma dump and where it's not. Or if you talk about things that are too uncomfortable, painful, right? The conversation gets uncomfortable, people get fidgety. But I've also noticed the flip side of that. And maybe that's because, and I don't know, I'd love to hear from people in the comments that didn't, spend most of their life in religious indoctrination and around religious people. But if you start talking about pleasure, people get uncomfortable with that. And they will start hedging the conversation. They'll
Yep.
start hedging the conversation. Well, yeah, but the yeah, but is always there.
Yep.
If you start talking too much about pleasure, and specifically sensual pleasure, because it's connected to the senses. And when I say sensual pleasure, certainly I'm meaning eroticism and sexuality, because that's a big part of sensual pleasure. But it's just anything of the senses. So something as simple as I really enjoy coffee in the morning. Like I really look forward to a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. And healthy or not healthy, I'm not giving that up.
Yep.
Because after 30 years of doing this, I still get pleasure, sensual pleasure, out of waking up and having a nice tumbler full of coffee the way I like it, the kind of coffee I like, and all that stuff, right? And so I just find it interesting that you can really push the comfort zone in
Yep.
both of these areas. You can push the comfort zone by talking about pain, your pain or their pain or painful stuff. And you can also push the comfort zone with pleasure. And it's as though people are afraid of pleasure in some ways. I understand being afraid of pain, but it's almost like if you pay really close attention and you listen to it, people will hedge. They'll start hedging. Well, I'm not saying you can just go out. I did it at the very beginning. You did it too. I'm not just saying you go out and live as a hedonist, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like our immediate thought is, oh, if I move too much towards pleasure, I gotta be careful here because I might be making a wrong decision or things could turn out poorly for me. And that's obviously true. That's obviously true. And I would argue people who become addicted to things like substances or obsessive shopping or gambling or sex or whatever it is, they get addicted to that feeling. I would argue they're doing that to avoid their pain.
Yep.
That pain is the underlying, trauma is the underlying, is the baseline. And so what I'm talking about and beginning to think about just this week, these are fresh thoughts, this is growing in real time, right?
Yep. Yep.
Is why does pain have to be the baseline so that people are using substances to avoid their pain, or they're using relationships to avoid their pain, or they're using shopping to avoid their pain, or they're using eating to avoid their pain? You take your pick, right?
Yep.
Why can't pleasure become the baseline? And that requires then a totally different mindset, and that requires an incredible amount of responsibility for yourself and for knowing yourself. One of these relationship trainings that I was in, they cited a statistic that less than 10% of the people, and of course this is, relationship counseling, so they get into the issue of eroticism and sex, but they say less than 10% of the population even knows what they like sexually.
Yep.
And more often than not, they're not free to explore those things. And so therefore it kind of becomes controlled, or this sort of negotiation with their partner, particularly if they're married, or they're in monogamous type relationship. So think about that. Something as basic as that, and only roughly 10 to maybe 20% of the population even understands that about themselves. That's how uncomfortable we are with pleasure, right? And so understanding what brings pleasure for you as a person, understanding what brings fulfillment to you as a person, understanding what satisfies you, understanding what makes you feel whole, and then taking responsibility for that, not only for owning that you have those things, but taking responsibility that those things are expressed and that those needs are met. In other words, you're responsible for yourself to make sure that you know yourself
Yep.
and that those things are met in your life. What you're doing then is you are taking responsibility away from other people to give it to you, which leads you out of codependent relationships, because a codependent relationship says, I need you to be X so that I can feel Y. I need you to act like this. I need you to do this and this and this so that I feel good and whole. And so you have really, in a lot of ways, a lot of relationships, it's emotional vampirism.
Yep.
And it's because we haven't done this kind of work. And it's because we're uncomfortable with topics like pleasure and eroticism and sexuality. And we don't discover those things, and we don't take ownership of those things for those things to be met in our lives. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Once you do that, now you're at a mature place where you're expressing yourself as a whole person, and now you're actually making better contact and relational contact with people, because they're not a source of supply for you anymore. So many people that lead by their pain, they want someone else, just like you mentioned, the guy that has the arrow, or the drama king or drama queen that wants to use their pain so that they get attention, so that they get whatever it is, whatever the benefit is. I don't have to work. I don't have to. Basically, if you look at that, it's abdicating responsibility on some level.
Yep.
Every time you do it, and you're abdicating responsibility because of the pain and the trauma that's in your life. And so it's just a whole new way for me to think about things that I was just introduced to this week. And so I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I just wanted to bounce it around with you and see what people think about this topic. I mean, do you agree with me that people get uncomfortable when you start
Oh,
talking too much about pleasure?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, think about this, right? That people, and this is one of the things that I hate about religion is that religion teaches you that it's bad to feel good.
Yep.
you know so if you're taught that it's bad to feel good, then what happens is that every time you feel good, you feel like you're doing something bad. And here's where it really gets off the rails,
Yeah.
because you'll think that, okay, I'm already doing something bad, so let
Yeah.
me just go ahead and go all the way, right? And this is where you get like sexual abusers, serial killers, and stuff like that, right? Because they don't have a boundary for what makes them feel good. And here's the other thing too, that I want everybody to understand, is that your feeling good, your feeling good has nothing to do with others. In other words, you have to get to the point where you feel good about yourself by yourself, right? Because what happens is that when you make your pleasure external,
Right.
then that means somebody has to do something. They have to perform for you to get pleasure. And again, this is where things get really sideways. Um, One of the things that I think about is like when you're seeking pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about the difference between hurt and harm, right? Your pleasure should never come at the expense of someone else's well-being.
Right.
And one of the things that I found is, and I found this in the workplace, and I found this in relationships, where people, what makes them feel good is hurting other people or seeing other people in pain.
Right.
And again, this is something that when it's left unchecked, it goes into some really dark places. But
Right.
one of the things I want to talk about pleasure, right? Because I knew a Navy commander. Let's put it that way. So I won't assign a rank to this, but a Navy commander
Mm-hmm.
who didn't get his day started without a bourbon and coffee every day. Every day. And this man was responsible for thousands of lives. Now, here's the interesting thing. This man was highly decorated, highly recognized, and he was one of the best naval officers I've ever known in my life. But if he didn't have that bourbon and coffee every day, now, here's the thing, that if that bourbon and coffee habit were known, he wouldn't have been the person that he was in terms of his position
Right.
in the military.
Right.
And he wouldn't have had the respect and the trust of the people that he had responsibility for. And I'll give you another example. I knew a guy, everybody talks about crack, right? And how crack is so addictive that nobody can. I knew a guy who was a crack user. I wouldn't even say he was a crack addict, but he was a crack user.
Mm-hmm.
And he smoked pretty much every day, right? Never addicted. And this guy had a very demanding, very people facing job. He was a first responder, but he managed that as long as I knew him. I mean, as long as I know this guy, he was, he went from freebase to crack, and he functioned just fine. So what I'm saying is that basically, if you understand yourself, and if you understand that, okay, this I know is the level that I can go to without causing any harm to anyone, right? So what's the problem with that? And to your point, if someone comes out, if a naval officer comes out and says, "Well, I think it's great to start your day with a bourbon and coffee," right? You would probably say, no, 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 that's wrong. Or if you were to say, hey, I can be a first responder and respond to all kinds of emergencies, right? Why, why, and I did some crack in the morning. You probably say, oh no, you can't do that, right? So here's the thing, that when people understand what how their pleasure impacts them, and how they're able to enjoy this pleasure without impacting others. Okay, now at that point, where is the wrong? Where's the problem with that? And that's the challenge, because some people will just say, like, I'm going to say something vulgar here, so cover your kids' ears, right? But let's say you like to masturbate in the morning, and this helps you cope. It helps you get through the day. So what's the problem with that?
Right.
Where is the harm in that?
Right.
So, and again, it's knowing, to your point, Aaron. It's like knowing yourself, and then understanding too that you are the ultimate arbiter of what gives you pleasure, to the degree that your pleasure causes no one any harm,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's my.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like we live in a culture, and again, this may just be my experience because raised in a Christian home, served as a pastor for decades. Most of my friends were Christians, my whole social circle. So maybe it's different outside of that context, but it's almost as though we have a culture that suppresses pleasure. Again, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like you said, if somebody masturbates in the morning and it helps them, feel good and get energized and get through their day, what's the big deal, right? But I don't know. It's just like it's like we really are raised in many ways in a culture of suppression. Suppress who you are, suppress what feels good to you, suppress what you like, suppress what you want. And it's that suppression that to some degree causes pain and trauma. And it's also that suppression that causes people to act out in inappropriate ways, I think, because they're not able to fully experience that part of themselves. And I'm not talking about, when I say experience that part of yourself, I'm not saying that you fulfill all those things, but you understand this is something that I really like and something that really satisfies me, and you're comfortable in that space, meaning you're comfortable having that conversation, you're comfortable having those thoughts, and you're comfortable working that out, which you bring up brilliantly, you know, thinking about the consequences of it, thinking about how this action is going to cause reactions. I want to nuance that though, because for the codependent person or the person who's in a relationship with a narcissistic abuser, they will leverage, they will almost create faux harm or fake harm. And so it's very easy for the codependent mind then to go back into the denial of pleasure and the denial of self in an unhealthy way. Because if I were to express myself the way I want to express myself, it's going to do harm to my relationships, or to, in this case, if it's with a narcissistic abuser, to my relationship. And that narcissist will pick up on that and they will leverage that to keep that person in their place. So they will actually not do anything that we're talking about as far as moving from pain to pleasure, because they'll have stuck in their mind, oh yeah, but if I do that, it's going to cause harm to this person, or it's going to cause harm to these people. And that's where it really needs to be nuanced. And I'm just speaking to people that have that codependent brain. It really needs to be nuanced in what is actually hurt and what is actually harm, which goes
Right.
back to something we talked about, I think, when we first started doing these, right?
Yep.
And so don't let that codependent brain take over and hear something that is actually going to be unhealthy for you. Because if you have structured, this is just the truth, if you've structured most of your relationships around avoiding hurt, whether it's you're avoiding hurt yourself, or you're avoiding hurting the other person, invariably through those exchanges and those negotiations, you're going to be very potentially caught in an unhealthy cycle and in an unhealthy pattern. So in other words, if I discover something about myself or something changes and I express that to people in my life, which you and I can both relate to this, just
Yep.
going through deconstruction. If I express that about myself in my life, chances are it's going to shake up those relationships, because the relationships are built on what we had in common. And if I change something that's a major commonality between us,
Yep.
then now that shakes up the whole relationship. Now, a non-narcissistic approach is, I want you to grow and mature and express yourself in however you're going to do that, and we can adjust, even if that means something about the relationship. So it's not, well, you better not do that or else.
Right.
See, because that's just, think about how much that's going to hurt me and how much that's going to mess this up and how much that's going to mess that up. That's not a healthy response. It's it's better, even if things get really jarred, if both people can come together, and I'm talking ideally, if
Yep.
both people can come together and say, okay, let's heal it together or leave it together. And but it's done in a but you can't do that if you don't have two whole people, and you can't be whole if you don't move the pendulum past the pain and trauma part of that spectrum that I'm talking about, and move it more into the pleasure part of the spectrum.
And you bring up a really good point too, because I think that this wholeness is really essential to the discussion, because if I don't understand what causes me pain, and conversely, I don't understand what gives me pleasure. And so what happens is that I wind up juxtaposing and conflating the two, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that I want to create some pain to give me a baseline for pleasure, or I engage in something that's pleasurable to me, but that it has consequences to others that I'm engaged with.
Right.
And so I think that part of this discussion has to be, what is the path to wholeness,
Yep. For sure.
right? How do I become a whole person? In other words, and again, this is another part where religion fucks everybody up, right? Because they talk about how brokenness is so essential, to your spiritual growth. And if you're not broken, God only uses broken vessels,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so if when you're broken, and let me give you an example, right? I used to race Mustangs, and I used to race Mustangs because there is nothing that goes faster for so little money as a Fox body Mustang. You can go fast for not a lot of money, right? So I knew people that when they built their cars, they would engineer against what they call single points of failure, right? So they would put traction bars to keep the rear axle from hopping on launch, right? And they would use a center force clutch to make sure that the engagement was solid. And then they would use what they call either a Tremec or God, I forget what the other transmission was called. There was is a T5 variant that had straight cut gears, and it made this awesome whining sound when the engine revved. But anyway, people would do that. Now me, what I would do is I'd go to a junkyard and I'd buy a Tremec T5, and I don't care what shape it's in, right? As long as it had the right ratios, I'd bolt it in my car and I'd use it until it was broken. Now, here's the problem, right? Is that I never reached the top tier of drag racing Mustangs because I always ignored that single point of failure. So what I was doing is I was never bringing a whole car to a race. I was always depending on how much horsepower I could generate or how good I could hook up at the axle, but that space in between from the engine to the rear axle, the clutch, the transmission, I wasn't paying any attention to that. And
Right.
so ultimately, I never reached the upper echelon of Mustang racers, right? Because I didn't recognize this part that was leaving me broken.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us, we go through life with this brokenness, and we assign this brokenness to some form of piety, right? That this is getting me closer to God, kind of thing,
Right.
right? And so rather than dealing with the brokenness, and rather than getting to healing and wholeness, that we accept the brokenness as part of the package.
Yeah.
And so in accepting the brokenness as part of the package, so we now invite pain to be our friend.
Yeah.
And here's the funny thing. I'm going to say this and I'll shut up. That when, like, you and I are both we've embarked on the fitness journey again,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yes.
And what do they say in weightlifting? No pain, no gain,
Yeah.
right? No pain, no gain. But what I've learned is, like, if I'm lifting, if let's say if I'm bench pressing and I'm not feeling, let's say, like for me, I have this rotator cuff issue that's
Hmm.
an ongoing thing, right? So I'll push heavy weight and I'll feel the rotator cuff, giving me trouble.
Right.
But I don't feel it in my pecs. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing through this pain to try to get this development.
Right.
And that's wrong. Because what I'm doing is I'm putting undue stress on another part of the body that's essential to doing a well-formed bench press, right?
Right. Right.
And and that's what we do. Somehow we associate pain with virtue.
Hmm.
And here's the thing. Listen, you can have pain and still be virtuous without the pain, without your virtue being dependent upon your pain.
Hmm.
That's the point that I'm getting at.
Yeah. So what comes into my mind when you said that no pain, no gain? Um, and I understand that, and you keep it in the context of exercise, but again, it's not always true.
No.
And but let's just think for a minute, because words hold us captive. I mean, if
Mm,
words didn't hold us captive, then religion wouldn't be a thing. In other words, just the words themselves. There's no substance to it. There's no reality to it. But the words themselves occupy your attention so much and occupy so much of your mind that it governs your uh, behaviors. Does that
yep.
make sense to you?
Yep.
And so let's just think about this for a minute. Let's think about how cynical we can get. And there's truth in all these statements in their proper context. But if you just let these become laws that you live by, you approach every situation with these cliches. All right. No pain, no gain.
Yep.
Don't get your hopes up. If it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yep.
Um, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure there's others out there, but those are three just right off the top of my head.
Yep.
Think about how that hypnotizes us to approach life. Like, if I'm not hurting, at least on some level, I'm not gaining anything.
Right.
If I get my hopes up, I'm destined to be disappointed. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I get that, again, those are appropriate in various contexts. But you can become hypnotized by those things. And again, listen to how anti-pleasure those things are. No pain, no gain. Don't get your hopes up. You know, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. If somebody says, if it feels good, do it. If it doesn't feel good, don't. Like, that can't be a philosophy for life. That's going to immediately, that's the immediate thought. That
Yeah.
can't be a philosophy for life, because that's going to lead to causing all kinds of harm. And sure, there are people out there, like you mentioned, that get sadistic pleasure out of hurting other people, right?
Yep.
But those people are going to do that. Like, if you're wired that way, you're going to do that anyway.
Yep.
So
That's
telling
exactly.
people, if it feels good, do it. They're not going to stop. People that have a sadistic nature, they're not sitting there thinking, oh my God, I shouldn't do that. They're not thinking that at all. It's the people who are in bondage to other things that are worried about that. You see what I'm saying? So, like, the narcissist, the sociopath, the psychopath, they're going to do what they're going to do. And you can't control it and you can't govern it by putting um, footnotes and asterisks.
Right.
Here's what we do. And I'm growing in real time, Derrick. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm thinking out loud. All right.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Love it.
if it feels good, do it. If it doesn't feel good, don't. Asterisk. Make sure you're not causing any harm in in the fine print,
Yeah.
right? Make sure you're not causing any harm. But the people who are really going to go out and cause harm, they don't give a fuck.
They don't.
Because that's the very nature of being narcissistic, sociopathic, and psychopathic. So what we're doing is we're putting the asterisk there for the psychopath, the sociopath, and the narcissistic personality disorder.
Yep.
And the only ones reading it are the people who don't need it.
Well, let's put another
Does that
asterisk
make
there,
sense
right?
to you?
Exactly. Let's put another asterisk there, though, for the sycophant, right?
Yeah,
Because there are some people that that their pleasure is taking shit from other people, right?
Mhm.
So it's and they're wired that way too,
Mhm.
you know. So it's like you have to, basically, as we write this in real time, we're footnoting this,
Yeah,
as we do it,
yeah,
because there terms and conditions apply, right?
right.
And one of the things that I think about is, okay, and again, people who take shit from others,
Mhm.
right? Because on the bullying spectrum, it really takes two to tango. I mean, basically, in any relationship, how that it takes two. It takes at least two. So in a bullied relationship, there has to be a bully and someone being bullied, right?
Mhm.
But the person being bullied has the right, the license, if you will, to resist the bullying,
Right.
irrespective of what the consequences may be. But sometimes they will allow the bullying, and sometimes even invite it, right? Because that's how they get pleasure. and it's sad, but again, this is why, when you talked about wholeness,
Mhm.
why I think that this is so essential to this discussion, and I almost think that we need to do a show just on wholeness. What does wholeness mean? What does it look like? How does it express, manifest, or whatever? Because basically, it is only the people who are lacking something that either feel the need to harm or hurt someone, or, or to harm or hurt someone to obtain pleasure, or people who feel that they have to be hurt or harmed in order to receive pleasure. And if you think about it, that's really the far end of the each of the far ends of the continuum. How do we get how do we get people past that? I guess that's the practical application of this. What can we say? What can we do? What can we share or impart that will help people find a healthy medium, so the people who feel like I have to harm to be pleasured, or I have to be harmed to be pleasured. How do we get people to this, to the meaty part of the bell curve,
Mhm.
right? I
Mhm.
guess that's the question that I would ask. And so I want to kick that to you from as a professional in clinical mental health.
Yeah, I don't. I'd prefer not to answer as a professional because that's a little bit outside of my scope of practice. I don't work
Okay.
with like one thing I won't work with a client who's a narcissist, or I won't
Yeah.
work with a client who's a sex offender. I won't, I just don't have the knowledge nor the desire to know how to help people like that. Now, if you're a narcissist or a sex offender or any kind of person that has those bents and you're seeking help, then that's a really good thing. I'm just not the guy to come to. But I'll give you my thoughts on it,
Okay.
just a person.
Go.
Um, I guess part of me is like, and again, I'm growing in real time with this, right? I'm expanding with this, but why do we feel the need to bring people into the what you call the meaty middle? I mean, if there are people who get off on causing harm and there are people who get off on receiving the harm, then let them get together. What's the problem?
Yeah, I and I see that, and you know what, in the spirit of growing in real time, you're saying to me without saying this, right? Derrick, don't judge. Let
Yeah,
let,
yeah,
let let these star-crossed lovers find each other.
exactly. I mean, seriously, I mean, like I think that's not where most people dwell, but
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that that's not okay for the people who are there. But yeah, I guess my thought on it is this is part of it, right? This is part of why people don't explore themselves. Like when you were talking about the Mustang, all I could think about, like I was getting the metaphor 100% as you were sharing it. Like if you don't know yourself, if you don't know your capacities and your limitations, if you don't know how you work as a human being, then you're not going to be able to live at the full capacity of who you are in the
yep,
way that you express yourself, right? And what's the number one thing probably that prevents us from expressing ourselves to our fullest capacity? In a lot of cases, it's cultural judgments or familial judgments or religious judgments that no, it's not okay to be that way, right?
yep,
And again, some of this stuff gets suppressed. So, it's possible, like you talk about the bully. Okay, so the person who is the nice guy, who always comes in last, who always seems to be walking around with a kick me sign on their back, they may not be actually choosing that. They may not actually want that. They may have been bullied and passed such a harsh judgment on their bullies that they never let the bully in them, and I don't mean bully, but they never let the strength inside of them rise up to set
mhm,
a good boundary or to stand up for themselves or to push back.
yeah,
And they might even derive some pleasure from that, right?
right,
Like they might, there comes a time, I know I've experienced this, where you just have had enough crap in a relationship that you have to essentially cut that person off, set such a boundary with that person in your life. It's as though, I got to be really careful here. It's as though you killed them because they have no more access to you and you have no more access to them.
Right.
And that might take that killer instinct inside of you. But if we judge that as wrong, you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Then we're not able to access that as a resource in a particular context where it may be healthy for us, and it may be even healthier for the other person. Sometimes if you're a source of supply for a narcissist, you're not helping the narcissist by being a source of supply for them. They need to go figure their stuff out, and they ain't going to do it as long as you're, or if you're enabling someone who is a substance abuser by allowing them to steal from you or continually funding their habit or continually covering for them and propping up this image, then you are supporting. That's where the term codependency comes from.
Yep.
You are supporting their dependency upon that substance. That's not in their best interest. And you might have to find that sort of killer instinct inside of you or sadistic instinct inside of you to cut that person off, realizing, they're going to reach bottom, but that's the only way that they're going to improve. And even if they don't improve, that's on them. I can't keep draining my own resources for life to support an addiction to a substance. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I think these things can be contextually worked out. And if we can honor all the aspects of ourselves, and I think that's where this starts. I think it starts by honoring all the various aspects of ourselves. But if we suppress that, so this is where I think, like what Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged. With the measure you use, it'll be measured back to you.
Yep.
I think some people read that in the sense that if I'm a really judgmental person, then people are going to judge me. I read it more as like, if I judge the bully in my perpetrator, and I'm going to judge the bully in me. And bully is a bad word, but
it works.
I'm saying.
Yep.
Then when I need to access strength to push somebody away from my life or to set a good boundary or to stand up for myself, I can't access that because I always have to be the nice guy. So I judge the person who's not the nice guy as for being terrible and awful, and I don't ever want to be like that. And then I just become the nice guy that gets beat up all the time in life, metaphorically.
Yep. And this is really good because what this is helping me to see is like that there's a difference between killing the connection and killing the relationship.
Right.
Right. In other words, if you say that this relationship can no longer flow on this conduit, this particular conduit, I'm killing this conduit, and I'm saying that I can still have the relationship, but not on these terms.
Right.
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 So in other words, I have to deal with the bully in me, the strength in me, the resistance in me to fight this off, to cut this off, to make sure that this particular conduit ceases to exist.
Right.
Because if I'm going to have a relationship with this person going forward, and man, I'm going to tell you something, Aaron. Goddamn, this is really powerful for me because I have been a scorched earth kind of person pretty much my whole life. And the only time that I wasn't a scorched earth person was when I was in ministry, right? Because I was like, okay, you gotta have empathy, compassion for everybody. You gotta understand everybody, and I've grown past that. I don't think you have to have empathy and compassion for everybody. I think that first of all, you have to have empathy and compassion for yourself, right? That you, in other words, when in the event of cabin depressurization, you put the oxygen mask on your own face first, right? What I'm saying is that I'm not saying that I'm not going to help others, but I'm going to make sure that I get the necessary oxygen first, right? So if that means that, again, going back to what I was saying, that if I have to cut a particular conduit, right? In other words, like you have several different utilities coming to your house. You have electric, you have gas, you have cable, right? Water, sewage, right? You could say, okay, what don't I need in this particular relationship? Okay, maybe I could cut the connection of internet connectivity, I don't necessarily need that, right? Well,
Mhm.
water, sewage, gas, maybe I need that, or maybe even gas I don't need. Maybe I can say, okay, I can switch from gas to electric, and I don't need that anymore. But my relationship with my community still remains. It's just that I've cut off those particular conduits, saying that those things no longer serve my best interests. And that's one of the things that we have to do. I think that in understanding this relationship between pain and pleasure, we have to say, okay, what is this? What am I dealing with that no longer serves me?
Right.
That no longer helps me to be a whole human being?
Yeah, and that's where religion really messes you up, because when I was thinking about this earlier, and all of this is in seed thought for me, seed form for me, very much so,
Yep.
not fully developed in any way. But I was thinking about what we're talking about when we're talking about love. Ultimately, I mean, love is pleasure, and pleasure is love. At the end of the day, here's what I mean by that. I love doing Freeology Friday with you. That's why we've been consistent for 3-4
For
years.
years. Yep. Yep.
I don't have to sit there and think, oh shit, I don't want to do this. I better get in there. That never crosses my mind. Even today, you were running a little bit behind. I was tired, and you're like, hey, we can it. We can take a week off. And I'm like, no, I don't want to. I love talking to you on Friday nights. So I'm willing to make time for that in my life and in my space. So I think if we start by loving ourselves, and really start by loving ourselves,
Yep.
but that means getting to know ourselves. You can't fall in love with someone you don't know. I remember we used to say about God, you got to get to know God, because you can't fall in love with someone you don't
That's
know.
right. Yep.
We needed to start with knowing ourselves, right? And falling in love with yourself. And when you love yourself, you don't submit yourself to a lot of the bullshit that we are kind of talking about, which would be pain, right? You're going to get off the pain side of the spectrum, and you're going to get more over on the pleasure side, because that's love, and what you love doing, what you enjoy doing. So we're talking about love and joy, all the things we talked about as
Yep.
Christians, right? What am I in love with? What gives me joy? Here, the problem is that religion teaches us that we have an unlimited supply, and there is nothing about us as human beings that is infinite or unlimited. And so if I try to give my love to everybody, then my love for the people that I actually love becomes cheap.
Yep.
That's why water is uh, cheaper than expensive cognac.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? Or rocks are cheaper than gold.
Yep.
And so if I follow this principle of living for the pleasure of things and cutting out the pain, then I decided I don't love being on Facebook a lot. Like
Yep.
I was for a long time, but I just don't love it. So I can go, the only time I really get on is Sunday mornings and on this anymore. And then every once in a while I'll check something, or I'll share something, or share a memory, or put something out there. But I don't spend a lot of time on it, not because I don't care about my Facebook friends, but I don't love it right now. And
Yeah.
so it's okay for me to carve out the time I used to spend on Facebook, conduit, right? Just trying to simplify this a little bit for people, and put that towards something else that I'm more satisfied and fulfilled in. So really, when we're talking about this, we're talking about living a life full of love. The difference is you don't have to give that to everybody, because you can't. You don't have enough in you to do it.
Yeah.
So it's okay to come back to the principle of, I just want to be a loving person, or I want to live by love. But again, we stretch it out. We stretch it to the nth degree, right? Like if I say I'm a loving person, that can't just mean that I live my life by that pull of love for the things that I love and the people that I love.
Yeah.
It has to mean I got to give love to everybody else too. I owe it. Somehow it's owed to everybody. Somehow it's owed to my enemies. Somehow it's owed to people that I've never even met. Somehow it's owed to people who have a philosophy of harm, like
Mm.
racism, or a philosophy of harm like white supremacy, or a philosophy of harm like extreme capitalism, right? So
Yeah.
I've got to love those people. No, I don't, because I don't love them. And so then we end up with this phony bullshit life that is the Christian mask, where we use all kinds of fancy language and all kinds of ethereal principles from a self-righteous position thinking that somehow we've arrived. No, you're living at a freaking Halloween masquerade every day of your life because you're wearing a mask and you're wearing a costume and you're pretending to be something that you're not because it's not humanly possible for you to be it. And you cannot draw upon enough infinite of the infinite God to
Yeah.
give that to everybody. Now, there may be people out there who had a greater capacity for empathy and compassion and could share that more with the world, you know. But that doesn't have to be everybody. And so coming back to this place where I'm going to live my life by love, but I understand that's a limited resource. And
Yeah.
so I'm not going to
I
wear
like this.
myself out. I'm not going to wear myself out trying to, you know, give it to people that I don't feel it towards. And
Yep.
also not, but that also prevents me then if I make that decision, I'm going to live by love. It also prevents me from getting snared into that hate trap
Yep.
where I'm just obsessed with what that group is doing or what those people are doing or what that person's doing because I hate them so much, right? Like
Yep.
I'm not going to let that be a part of my life either because that for me, I don't find that fulfilling. I find that distressing.
Yeah.
And so for me, this gives a lot of freedom to reinvent myself and to get to know myself at this stage of my life and say, okay, what am I about? And I've been talking about this since January, you know, when I had the neck surgery. What
Yep.
am I about? What are my values? How do I want to show up in my life right now? And that's okay if it's different than the person I was last year or 5 years ago. And if people in my life, I'm very, very, very fortunate because the people closest to me want me to express myself
Yep.
in my fullest capacities. So I don't have to worry about how it's going to affect them because I'm not out to hurt them because I love them, and they're not out to restrict me because they love me.
You know, I've said this that everybody that I meet starts off with a 600 credit score in terms of their relationship with me. And depending on how they handle that credit, their score can go up or it can go down.
Right.
You know, and so like so Aaron, you are like an 825, right? It's like I trust you in a very intimate way.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people that I wouldn't trust any further than I could throw a building, right? So what you're saying, and again, I'm receiving this and I'm growing in real time because I used to always operate from this premise of unconditional love. That I have to love people no matter what. I have to work and now I see it where I don't have to love everyone. I'm not because love is a finite resource. It's not scarce, but it's not infinite, right? So that means I have to be careful with whom I share love with.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? That the people that give me pleasure, I'm able to extend more credit to them. But the people who cause me consistent pain, I'm able to lower their score, reduce their credit limit, right? Because I don't have to deal with that.
Right.
And so what I've learned is that this gives me the freedom to really lavish the love that I have on the people who really are interested in reciprocate. In other words, if we're talking about completing a circuit, I'm all about sharing my love with people who are interested in completing the circuit with me.
Right.
But the people with whom I'm giving one way and they're not interested in completing the circuit, I really have no vested interest in giving them love, whether conditional or unconditional.
Right.
I'm able to cut that conduit off, and so this you've helped me with something today because what I'm learning, what I've learned in real time today is that there are many conduits to every relationship.
Yeah. Right.
There are many connections to every relationship. Those conduits that don't serve me, that don't serve my best interests, I'm under no obligation to keep them.
Right.
I can cut those off, and I can do it with a clear conscience.
Yeah, and that also, I think, in my mind, and again, I want to just let everybody know we're just having a conversation. This is just in seed form, not speaking as an expert on the matter at all. But in my mind, the closer the relationship, the more conduits there are.
I,
Um,
I'll
and
agree to that.
that's why breaking up, especially intimate relationships, is so hard, because there may be just 3 or 4 conduits, or there may be, let's say there's 30 conduits and you hate 25 of them,
Yeah,
but there are 5 that are still feeding you.
yeah, still robust.
It's hard to just make a complete break, right?
Yep.
So I always try to have compassion towards clients and people that maybe they are with an abuser, but they can't break it off right away. It's like, you didn't get this connected overnight. You can't just expect to just, scorch the earth. Some people can do that, but not a lot of people can't. And so, but here's the other thing. Like, if I'm whole and responsible, and my partner is whole and responsible, and I say, I'm not going to be treated a certain way. Like, in other words, if this conduit is bringing me a lot of pain, I'm going to cut this conduit off. And my partner knows that, or my wife knows that, and I know that about my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to treat each other better, because you don't have the obligatory thing that's holding you together.
Dude, that's powerful.
Stay married. We have to, you know what I mean? And so it's like, no, I'm not going to put up with that shit. And I don't want you to put up with that shit either. And we're not going to stay together just because we're obliged to stay together.
Wow.
That will make you respect each other and treat each other better, I think, in the long run.
That may be the single most profound thing that I've heard in 2023. I'm serious. I'm not bullshitting. That's,
I'm growing in real time, as I'm
yeah.
talking about it. So, yeah.
But you wanna look through comments, or
Sure.
yeah, because I want to deal with one. There's
Sure.
a fellow or a person, I don't know whether it's a fellow or a lady. Blessed be he. A lot of comments in here, and if you're on Facebook, you don't see this because these comments are coming from YouTube. But how can I say this? There are two things. One is that I really believe that there is an innate need for attention in the human psyche, right? I'll never forget this. This is a true story. Um, we were going through this thing with my son Anthony, and this was like when he was in second grade, and he said to us, to my wife and I, he said regarding this teacher, said she doesn't see me. She doesn't see me.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately understood what he meant. Because you can be present in the midst of someone,
Mm-hmm.
be active in the discussion, in the discourse,
Right.
but be relegated to the shadows. And this happens because, like, part of the whole social fabric, right,
Mm-hmm.
is that we have people who we give shine to
Mm-hmm.
and people who we give shade to.
Yeah.
And and so when Anthony said this, I went to, my wife and I, we went and talked to the teacher, and I said that if you are going to teach and to be an effective teacher, then you have to give every child the sense that they are a sense of being in this classroom.
Right.
If you're not willing to do this, then you are not effectively doing your job. And if you're not willing to do this, then I'm going to do what I need to do to have you removed from this position.
Mm-hmm.
I said, because this is not just my child. I'm sure that if my child feels that he's not being seen, there are other children that are feeling the same way.
Right.
Because this is not, if this isn't a personal vendetta, then that means you're projecting the same energy elsewhere,
Right.
right? And so when I said that, her whole demeanor changed.
Mm.
And after that, we never had this problem again. I believe that people need to be seen and they need to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, just because you are seen and because you are heard doesn't mean that your voice carries the same impact.
Right.
You have to understand that not every statement merits a reaction. And I'm saying this because, blessed be he, whoever you are. Um, I think that it's clear that you're not being seen, but I want to acknowledge you because I want you to understand that you are seen.
Mm. Mm.
However, what you're saying is you're making comments without understanding context, and you're not really reading the discussion, you're not reading the room. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not reading the room, then that means your comments do not have the same kind of impact that you perceive they should.
Hold on one second. Hold on
So,
one second, Derek. Hold on.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So that I want to say that too.
Sorry.
So
Go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry.
So blessed be he or she or they speak on purifying yourself. Purifying yourself according to whom? What is the standard of purity, and by what means should we or anyone in the listening audience purify ourselves? So those are the things. I just wanted to say that because I wanted to make sure that this person is acknowledged.
Yeah, I like it though because it illustrates exactly what we're talking about. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about because we're talking about finding yourself, knowing yourself, finding where your pleasure zones are, and pursuing your pleasure zones. And the reason we don't is because of the pushback and the especially religious and cultural conditioning that we undergo. And so we can't even talk about this. I mean, this just validates everything. Thank you, blessed be he, because not only did you help the algorithms by commenting so much so that more people will see it, but you're also completely in real time, if you're on YouTube, validating everything that we're saying. And I appreciate that
Yep.
because what we are talking about is how people don't live on this pleasure spectrum, about how they're uncomfortable talking about it. I mean, one of the comments I wanted to comment on was, I think, Jeffrey Free, I think I got the name right. He said, I'm a recovering, I'm in recovery. I don't have the comment in front of me, but I read it earlier. I'm in recovery, but I'm still uncomfortable talking about what's sensual. That's a problem in our society. And this is why. So blessed be he, you're showing exactly, you're just illustrating perfectly for us exactly what we've been talking about, but not in the way that you think. So that's all I would say about that. But that's exactly it. That's exactly it. We get inundated with these messages, and this just proves the point that people are uncomfortable talking about pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Like, you mentioned this, that I think 80% of people don't know what they want sexually.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
and I think that contributes to more failed relationships, more failed marriages than anything else. If you're not willing to talk about, okay, this makes me feel good, this satisfies me, this I don't like, and if you're not willing to say these things, then it's like how do you get to a sexually fulfilled relationship? Or let's take sex out of it. Let's walk it back a step, right? Let's take the meta step. and and look at that and say, okay, not just sex. Let's talk about life. What gives me pleasure?
Right.
What satisfies me? And this is the thing. If you're unwilling to talk about this, if you're saying, well, God wants me holy and not happy, so I'm not going to talk about this, then what happens is you wind up unfulfilled, you wind up frustrated, and here's what happens is that either you'll either go through life unfulfilled because you're not expressing your needs or having your needs even considered,
Mhm.
much less acknowledged or fulfilled, or that you get so tied up where your desires become so pent up
Yeah.
that now all of a sudden it explodes. And now you're doing things in a way that is either harmful to yourself or harmful to others.
Right. Yep.
And of course, I have to give the Ben Urban comment.
Yeah.
Ben
I
says
like that one.
universalism and oneness theories both demand that we love everyone, which is just as legalistic as fundamentalist religious practice. Ben, bruh, that is so true because I never forget, like, as I was evolving in Christianity, and I went from being Pentecostal to being inclusionist to being preterist to being universalist, right? As I was going through these different détentes, um, I was thinking, I said, there is no greater manifestation of Christianity than to express love for everyone else. But I'm going to turn back to an Aaron Tomlinson teaching that said that Jesus was not the embodiment of unconditional love. And dude, when you said that 4 years ago, that was a seminal moment for me because I was like, wait a minute, Jesus is unconditional love. He absolutely is unconditional. I mean, and how can you say that? But then when I really took time to listen to what you were saying in your videos and to process what you were, because you did a lot of comments on this, a lot of posts on this, and I was like, God damn, he's absolutely right. So if Jesus doesn't represent unconditional love, then why are we holding on to this? Why is this unconditional love such a thing?
Mhm. Really, it's outside in living, right?
Yep.
It's oneness community, Bible, church, whatever tells me I have to be this way. And it goes against everything inside of me. But I have to be this way. So I have to make everything inside of me conform to
Yep.
what is being said, rather than this sort of inside out living, which is kind of what we're talking about tonight. Hey, Ben.
Hey,
What's
Aaron,
up, man?
Derrick.
Hey, man,
Good
you
evening,
got you
guys.
got the hat memo.
Yeah. Yeah, I had commented earlier about Asa saying that. He saw the
Hey,
video and he's like, why does Derrick have Daddy's hat?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
So I had to show him. It's okay. We have the same hat.
And I'm making an end portal in Minecraft.
I actually have a similar hat
Nice.
upstairs. If I'd have gotten the memo, then we could all.
Nice.
Oh man, that would have been too cool.
Okay. He made a portal in Minecraft.
I heard him. That's
It's my
awesome.
vacation hat. It's what I wear to look like a tourist. With my, you know, shirts.
But yeah, this topic on it's really, it reaches me in a really deep place because it really disturbs me because it makes me think of evangelistic thought process. This idea of like, I must decrease so he increases. I
Yep.
must suffer so that he could be in ecstasy. It's this idea that like we owe this God something, so we must just be at the lowest point in our existence so that this God can be at the highest point of its existence. And it's really fucked up because you don't ever experience this God firsthand.
Right.
It's all just this talk, this legendary idea of this God.
Yeah,
It's crazy. It's crazy.
it is.
Yeah, this whole thing about that I must decrease, right? And
Yeah.
and and let me say this, right? That here's a growing in real time moment, right? That unless you're increasing, you're not really growing.
Right.
You must increase. And if you say that I must decrease, what you're saying is I must subordinate myself, I must subordinate my existence, I must reduce who I
My
am.
F portal.
I see it, man. That's awesome.
Sorry, guys.
No, that's cool.
He's so excited.
Why he's got a future in software engineering.
I believe he does. He's something. He's really on top of all this. But I mean, yeah. I mean, going back to that, I mean, it's very disturbing, this idea that only this God can only get to its highest point when its followers at its lowest point.
Yeah.
I mean, the more we just like dig deep into the dirt and sleep and just give away ourselves, the more this God exalts. It's so fucked
Well,
up. It's this idea. It's like it's voluntary failure to launch syndrome. You just stay at the bottom.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I have to tell you guys a funny story that happened. So the college hosted a FCA event. It was a sports camp that was sponsored by Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and wonderful people involved. Genuinely, if anybody's watching this, you are wonderful people, and I genuinely love you and appreciate you for what you're doing. But I was talking to someone, a parent, who had a child that was going to the camp, and she warned her child ahead of time and said, get ready for them to try to get you to sign up for something afterwards. And they started having this conversation, and she says, they're going to try to make you feel like a worm. And there are certain voices in the FCA community locally that I know that's their shtick. Like, they want to make you feel like. I was at a FCA conference where they were like, young people, I want you to know that you were born. And I finished the sentence in my mind. I said, with a purpose and a plan, because that was always my emphasis. And he said, a dirty, rotten sinner headed straight for hell. And I was just like, oh, I was still pastoring back then. So she and her child were talking about wormy camp. And she said, well, the camp wasn't as wormy as I thought it was going to be. She said, but they sure use God's name a lot. And she said, it'd be like if I was talking to you, Mom, and I'd say, Mom, thank you, Mom. Mom, would you just please, Mom, get me something to eat, Mom? Because Mom, I love you, Mom, and thank you for getting me something to eat, Mom.
But can I tell you an FCA story?
Crack me up, man.
This is a true story. We were in Arizona, and Ducey and Anthony went to FCA camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was 4 days, right? 4 days. We dropped them off, and when they came back, Ducey was on fire for Jesus. He was like, I have to witness, I have to tell people, I have to purify myself. He was going through all the motions. And I don't know what happened, because I was like, as a pastor, I was like, wow, I said that's really cool. And Ducey said something to me at one point after that. He said, Dad, he said, I need to study under you and learn everything about ministry. He said, in case something happens to you, that somebody will be able to take over the ministry.
Wow.
And I said, Ducey, I said, you don't need to do that. I said, if you feel called, if you feel led, I'm not going to call you to pastor. I'm not going to stand you up and put you on the pedestal. I'm not going to.
You.
And so it was like, it was shortly after I said that that Ducey began to expand things, and he came to me one day and he started talking about vibration and and quantum entanglement and all these different things, and I'm like, okay, these are things that I've been thinking about, these are things that I've been sharing, but all of a sudden now he's getting it right. And so I want to say that Ducey was actually further along in his spiritual journey than I was. He became my teacher. And it's funny when you say, okay, like that your kid actually begins to lead you, but that's really what happened, you know. And so FCA, it
No, you're good. You're good.
on the one hand, it and it's funny, like Anthony came back from this, like he said, he told me like probably like a year or two afterward, he said, yeah, Dad, um, all of that was just total bullshit. He was just like, he said, I listened and I went along with it because, I wanted to, wanted to participate. I wanted to, be involved in all of that. But he was like, he said, no, Dad, he said, that was just really, that was really bullshit. So it was like Anthony got it right away. Ducey, it took a minute to come to, but then when he came out of it, it was like, Ducey was in a place where he was able to help me see some things that I was already considering, and help me to change direction. So that's my FCA story.
That's cool. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to have to take leave.
Okay.
So you guys can continue, and appreciate you both. Love you both very much.
It's
All right,
always
Eric.
good to
Love
see
you,
you,
man.
Aaron.
Yep.
I love
Thanks,
you, man.
buddy.
Ping me later, man.
All right, later.
All right. Yeah. So, man, this is cool, man. We both have the hat.
Well, it's so funny because like I thought about it, and then Asus, sat down next to me, and he's like, "Why does he have your hat?" He literally thought you took my hat. I'm like,
It's funny. A true story, right? Carl Forehand hates this hat.
he doesn't like
He
fedoras,
doesn't,
right?
he doesn't
In
like the hat.
general.
He says he always tells me, he says, Derrick, don't ever wear that hat again. But I think that he doesn't like it when I wear it up like this, right?
Oh, okay.
But I switch it into fedora mode, and maybe it's a little bit better. Maybe Carl won't hate it as much.
I don't know.
Yep.
I almost wonder if he just doesn't like fedoras, but
Well, you know what I had said, and I did this when Carl was here. I said, Carl, I said, what size hat do you wear? He says, well, I wear a large hat. And I said, you know something, I'm going to give you the hat that I hate. And he's like, no, Derrick, I'm not going to wear that hat. So I didn't give him the hat because I don't want the hat to go to waste. I spent good money on this hat. So
it's a nice hat.
thank you, man. Likewise.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had a couple of fedoras in my time. I definitely like this one the most, especially living in the Carolina coast. Like
Yeah.
this one is definitely best for the temperature. So
Yep. It's funny. Like I remember when I first met you, you had the hat on in pictures, and so I said, this guy must be, you know, receding hairline or everything. But you have like the most glorious head of hair.
well, this is the thing about me is like I like my hair short because I can do multiple things with it. But when it gets to like this awkward place,
Yeah.
I hate showing my hair. I'm very vain in that way. So I'll start wearing a hat when it starts looking bad. Or when I didn't like put wax in it or something, style it.
Well,
The
I
hat
tell you
on.
what, man, it's like you and Beth made some awesome copies, man, because your boys have awesome heads of hair.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Like you could see it on the what is it called? The ultrasounds. You
Yeah,
could see their hair in the pictures. It was crazy.
wow,
I was like, wow.
that is too cool. Yeah, so anyway, I put the link out here in case anybody wants to join in. There was this guy or person, blessed be he, that you if you're on Facebook, you don't see the comments, right? Because this person is
Right.
commenting from YouTube. Um, but
He
but boy,
he was on or he or she was on the last time that I was live too with you. So
yep, yep. And there was someone else on here. I'm trying to think of who it was that basically kind of checked this guy. Marietta Hughes on YouTube also.
oh yeah, little G.
Yeah. Oh, that's little
Little
Z.
Z, little
Okay.
Z. That's what it
Okay.
is.
Yeah. Well, little Z said, "Blessed be he. Try listening." But I guess blessed be he never makes it to the end of the show. That
No.
that's something that I've learned is that he or she they come on at the beginning of the show and put all these comments on here that are totally irrelevant to whatever it is that
Right.
we're talking about, and then when I put the link on there, hey, join in, crickets.
Right. It's this mindset that like anything that might stir up any question of their beliefs, they get offended.
Yep.
And sometimes it has nothing to do with what they're talking about or what we're talking about. It's just something that like they see something in it and they're like, "Oh, wait. This is
Well,
alternative. This
here's
is
the thing.
not in my wheelhouse. I better jump on this."
If you come into something with preconceived notions, right, or with an agenda, you're not going to hear anything, right? You're
Right.
you're going to come in and you're going to say whatever it is that you want to say. And one of the things that I try to do is if I'm going to engage in a conversation, I try to check my biases. Now, I'm not saying that I leave them behind, but I put them in check so that, I'm not my discussion is not framed by my biases,
Right.
you know. So I try to do that. I try to do that. And sometimes I'm more successful than others, but that's what I try to do. So you giving us the tour of the house?
I'm gonna make some food. I'm a
Where's
couple
Beth?
hours behind you, so
Okay. Where's Beth right now?
she's hanging out in the bedroom. She's a little sore today, so
Okay.
she's relaxing.
Yeah, I can dig it. My wife just came off some foot surgery, so
Oh
she's
wow,
a little
yeah.
tender. And then we had this thing like last week. We had a storm that blew through here, 100-mile-an-hour winds, and it knocked our power out for 4 days.
Oh,
Like
wow,
basically from Saturday night until Wednesday, we were without power last week.
that's
And
rough.
and so what happened was is that our dog apparently got anxiety from that.
Hmm.
So we took him to the vet because basically he woke up in the middle of the night, he's panting and he's shaking, right? And so my wife is like, okay, it woke her up and it kept her up, and she's asking me why didn't it wake me up, and I'm like, well, I didn't tell her this, but I had a cocktail before bed last night, right? Because I'm kind of processing my aunt's death and everything,
Yeah,
and so I did that so that I could sleep.
whatever helps,
Yeah,
definitely.
and so so that helped, but you know the, the whole thing with my aunt is like this is my mom's last sibling. And the other thing is that my aunt was one of the sweetest people, one of the sweetest human beings I knew. You know, and the world is less of a good place because of her departure. But she left a good legacy. 4 kids, a ton of grandkids, great grandkids, and great great grandkids. So she had a good run. You know, but my heart goes out to my mom because that was her last sibling.
Yeah,
You know, And,
I
and
mean, yeah, I mean, that's your nuclear group. You know, you grew up in that, and when you lose that, I mean, I imagine that would be really hard. Like
yeah,
that's the last
I mean, like
focal
for
point
me,
of that group.
I have both of my parents. Both of my parents are still alive. All of my
That's that's
siblings are
that's
still
really
alive.
amazing. I mean,
You
that's
know,
really
and
really good.
so it's like I really don't understand that, but it's like, my mom is like both of her parents are gone, all of her siblings are gone, you know. That's hard.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and if you don't have anything else to share, I'm going to go ahead and bail out, find some dinner for me and my wife. The kids are all out, so it's
No,
just
I pretty much filled it all out in the comments. So
yeah. And you put some good stuff out there. And Ben, I want to tell you, man, I appreciate you. And you and Daryl, man, either you and Daryl need to get back out there and start doing stuff on Sundays again, or you guys need to do something individually. However you're going to do it, but you guys need to do stuff because you guys have incredible voices that need to be heard.
well, I want to put it out there as saying it has nothing to do with Derrick. It's all on me because I've just been working through some stuff and I just haven't been there right now.
Yep, I understand.
It's definitely not him, but
I understand.
like I definitely want to get some going eventually again with him or some in some capacity because
Yep. No, but you guys have great chemistry, and I want to foster that, and tell you how much I think that's appreciated. But at the same time, well, we'll talk. We'll get some conversation offline. But dude, I just want to tell you that you're awesome, and I love you, and I appreciate you and all that you do. You've been an incredible force for growth for me.
well, thank you, and I feel the same way, and I love you so much, man. And this every Friday, and that's why I dropped the comment. Are you guys live tonight? Because Fridays have become a ritual for me, and it's been like sanctimonious for me to some degree. Because like I love you guys, and you drop a lot of knowledge, and you drop a lot of good spiritual growth for me. So you and Aaron are both very much mentors to me. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. And I love you so much, and give my best to Beth and to the boys. I can't wait to meet you guys and group hug all of you.
I can't wait. I
I'm
can't
looking
wait.
forward to that. So we're going to go ahead and check out. Thanks for attending our TED Talk. And until the next time, peace and hair grease. Adios.